So
Sounds good.
I'll start today with how fast can you run the 100 meters?
You're asking me?
Yes.
How fast can I run the 100 meters? Wow, it's honestly, I haven't captured that for a while. Put it somewhere 12, maybe something like this.
Oh wow, that's yeah, that's fast. I haven't
12,
got a clue
13.
how you beat me hands down. Put it that way. Okay, so let's get straight into this. And if you can just give us a brief explanation and story about how you've got to where you are in your career.
Yeah, sure. So basically, I'm Lucas. I used to be with Google for quite a while, around 4 years, I would say, and was part of Google's mobile optimization team, which means we were working with Google's biggest clients in the UK in order to optimize their mobile performance. Because obviously, since more and more people are getting more traffic to the mobile page, and that overall mobile traffic has surpassed desktop traffic, getting conversions on mobile is important. While usually, conversions are lower on mobile than on desktop. Hence, this sort of task force was initiated to help Google's clients with speeding up their website, increasing conversions. Yeah, and this is where I've seen for sort of, into a lot of companies into how to optimize their web pages. And I think I've learned a lot of practical things that a lot of guys could actually apply to their websites. And maybe a new way of thinking about page speed optimization rather than just looking at how to optimize your service. So yeah, and after that, after leaving Google, I was with Workday as a UX designer and now building pathmonk.com, which is a product that helps actually marketeers to automatically qualify and convert around 40% more leads from their websites. But we're going to go into that, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely. That's great. 40%. That's amazing. So, first and foremost, I just like you to explain to the listeners what is page speed and how does it help with SEO and conversions?
Yep, sure. So I think your question is a really smart question because a lot of people can think about page speed very differently, right? Because ultimately, page speed is only what metric that you look at, right? So there is the load time of the complete page, there is the time to the first byte, there is the start of the rendering on the screen. What we did in Google, I think, and is very helpful to have that on hand, is to look at one particular metric. It's called page speed index. And that page speed index really just tells you how long does it take until that first above the fold content is fully painted. So you have full, you have your image, you have your call to action, you have your value proposition, your menu, and everything loaded above the fold so that a user can see something meaningful. I think it's always good to have sort of that anecdote running in the back of your mind to a retail situation. And if you would go into a store, I would compare page speed at the first instance into how quick does the door open, right? And if the door just like opens super, super slow and you're not patient, you just might go past. And that's what happens in a lot of cases on your page, on mobile pages,
Mhm.
because a lot of pages don't actually show content within the first couple of seconds. I think there's a um, study that says about 53% will leave if the page is not loaded after 3 seconds.
Wow, 3 seconds, such a short space of time. It's unreal. We're so impatient nowadays. We're just that used to things being instant.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's those clicks. Like I think we call that Google moment. Call that mobile moments within Google. Somebody having around 150 mobile moments per day, and it's probably increasing. Which means it's just a short instance, right? You pull out your phone, you want to check something. If it's not properly working, you just might leave it. Or like it's like it's the usage behavior that we have on mobile is just geared towards things have to be there immediately. Um, Partially it's the attention span, but partially it's also the experience that we usually have on that device that triggers that.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of determining factors that go into creating a valid and decent website, if you consider things like the UX and other various factors, how
Mhm.
important is page speed?
I mean, I could ask you how important it is that the door to your shop opens.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So I think in this case, and I think is sometimes I think it's really good to do a step back and just look at it. Look, why, for example, does Google care about page speed optimization? Because they want to have a good experience on mobile, because more and more traffic is coming through mobile, more search results are served on mobile devices, and a bad experience is if you open a page and nothing is served, right? Because somebody will just be leaving. So I think it is crucial. I think it's a very important thing to take into consideration. And sometimes it's being overlooked because, if you test your website in your office's Wi-Fi, it's being a cached version in the worst case, you're just going to see it immediately. But that's not what the reality is of how people experience your page out there, right? People are not going to be all on high-end devices. People are not going to be all on 5G, 4G, maybe even some of them will be still on 3G fast. It depends. So taking all of this into consideration, you come to the conclusion that I think, opening the door to your shop so that somebody can actually buy is just crucial.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. So it's a massive factor to consider, and I think nowadays where we're always online, we've got mobiles, desktop, etc., etc. To forget one or the other is just detriment to everything that we actually do. So page speed, massively important. Basically, your shop door, don't lock it, don't make it difficult to get in.
Mm-hmm.
Where and when do we start to consider page speed then in the development of a website?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, if you're developing a new one, keep it in mind while you're developing. So the way to think about this, I think, is a good one is you have a speed budget, right? So you have a budget to play out, and that means you can basically, have to make trade-offs all the time. And I think it becomes clearer if I say the reason for a page to not loading quickly, or better, the reason for the first above the fold content to not rendering quickly is usually that some of the files that are be loading are hindering this rendering of the screen. So let me make that a bit more clearer. There is something called the critical rendering path without going into too much depth, but ultimately the browser has to walk a certain path in order to be able to show something on the screen, right? And by the files, JavaScript, CSS, are by default render blocking. So if you have a lot of JavaScript, you're going to block that path for the browser to show anything, which means your screen is going to be white, right? So hence, if you're developing a website, or even if you look in an existing one, the best way to think about this, keeping the speed index in mind that we just discussed, and you can test that actually on webpagetest.org, throw in your URL, run a test, and see your speed index and how quickly you're loading your content. The best way to think about this is to walk file by file through your waterfall and see what is actually impacting my page speed. Is it because I'm loading 10 JavaScript files at the beginning and they're blocking the rendering, but only 2 of them are actually needed at the very beginning because maybe one JavaScript file is responsible for the checkout process, which is at the very, very end of the site. Mm-hmm. So a good way and to think about this is to walk along your files as they appear in the waterfall, and webpagetest.org is actually built by some Googlers, will give you that output. It will show you in sort of slow motion how is your page loading screen by screen, and then what files are being loaded step by step. And for each of the files and file types, there is a different strategy to optimize them. So you can actually walk step by step and then chop off a couple of seconds here, a couple of seconds there, without having to think about changing, the server setup or something major. Just within the files, just to give you a feel for that. Sometimes it can be as easy as changing your font file format. There is an old font file format called TTF. It's usually 30% bigger than the very newest one, WAV2. Just by converting that font file, this particular fonts will show up a bit quicker because the font file is smaller, right? And it's really about going step by step through that process.
Wow,
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so interesting. It's all these little things that can have a massive impact. And when we're talking about 2 to 3 seconds of attention span and the difference between someone walking in a door and going to the next shop, your competitors, those seconds or milliseconds are hugely important.
Yep. And I think I would say the biggest takeaway that I got from the years at Google is to not always think about this as it has to be a huge project. We have to revamp our mobile website. No, sometimes it can be as simple as, run your website through webpagetest.org, see the results and check. Am I loading too much JavaScript? Which JavaScript you could be deferring, means loading later. Am I loading a huge hero image, which loads at maybe position 86, and therefore my screen is just wide for a long period of time? a quick way around this would be to take the hero image, you base64 encode it, you put it into your HTML file, so it's sent at the first request. So there's tricks for every sort of element or actions you can do, but I think the biggest misconception would be to say, this is our mobile page, we have to revamp everything to load fast. No, sometimes it's just look at the files that you already have. Are you using them in the smartest way?
And it's interesting to note that we could have this beautifully designed website that looks amazing and it's so engaging and really impressive, yet it takes an age to load, and it's just the user experience from getting onto the site is just terrible.
If they're getting on there, right? If you take into consideration 53% would be leaving within the first 3 seconds. So even though if you have great animations, you will have to consider how many people will actually never see that, just because of the fact you brought in something like, you made your site more engaging with JavaScript, or you have a carousel running at the top with like 6 marketing messages, which is in essence JavaScript plus 6 images, meaning longer load time. So you have six messages that maybe never actually reach somebody because they just left, versus you might have one image, one message, no JavaScript for that image, optimize it and show it quicker. So it's a trade-off game, basically.
Yeah, sure. So we're doing all this stuff. We're making the page speed a lot quicker, but as in all walks of life, I suppose, and marketing, more important than anything, we have to monitor and measure all these changes to make sure if they've worked or how much they're actually working. Mm-hmm. What would you advise being the best metric to measure speed?
Yeah, I come back to the page speed index because ultimately speed is about, in the first instance, right? In the first instance, speed is about capturing somebody so that they don't leave your site. So page speed index is a metric that you can get through a test in webpagetest.org. It's given in milliseconds, which means if you have a page speed index of 3000, your above default content will be fully painted within 3 seconds. So I think that's a great metric to focus on. We focused on that while being at Google, and I think it makes a lot of sense because you can optimize for it by looking at your files, and it's actually reflecting what the person is going to be seeing on the screen, rather than a first time to byte. A first time to byte does not mean at all that a user is seeing the screen with content. So speed index is a great one.
Cool, and I'll put all links to anything you mention in the show notes anyway, so people don't have to be writing this stuff down because they're usually in a car or walking or whatever, and they just can't do that. That aside, is there anything else listeners can do immediately to improve page speeds without going into the technical elements of changing servers and all the back end kind of complex elements?
Yep, that's basically the point I'm trying to make. It doesn't have to be that complex. It can be as simple as, the biggest things, I can give you the biggest, easiest things, right? Mm-hmm. If you are having, I mentioned it before, if you're having a carousel on the top of your mobile page showing 6 images, it's basically you are by default making your page slower because you're running JavaScript. JavaScript is blocking the rendering. So I'd say that's one really big thing. You're loading a lot of images, JavaScript, that is the JavaScript render blocking, therefore page loading slower. You are loading huge images. You can compress those images. I think that's a very, very common one. A lot of people will know about that, but compressing the images, I think is key. And ultimately, I think I would refrain from saying there is like one thing that you can do to be faster, because it really depends on the page and your flow. Because if your page is blank for 10 seconds, and then it takes another 4 seconds to show the hero image, the reason is you're having too much JavaScript, CSS that is render blocking at the first place, most likely. And then you are having a hero image that is loading too late or is too big. So it takes, I would suggest to marketeers to run a test on webpagetest.org, get a real feel, so you can say it's on 3G, 4G, or 5G, get a real feel for how your website is loading, and then sit together with your developers or your agency and walk through that funnel and see where there's optimization potential. Because I'd say there isn't that one catch-all thing. One big one, maybe, if there's a lot of WordPress users out there, you can conditionally load your plugins, because a plugin, in essence, most of the time is nothing else than a lot of JavaScript, right? And therefore, render blocking, if you run a lot of plugins and you don't need them, There is a plugin for that. Even if you want to be less developer driven, there's a plugin to conditionally load your plugins. That's a good one. We can put that in the notes. Yeah, I would step back from saying there's like one way to optimize it. It's really just walking along your funnel, walking along your waterfall, and then seeing what is the big drivers. And usually a big driver is something that blocks the rendering, and something that is the content that is above the fold not loading quickly enough. Maybe a very funny, interesting one is you could even go as far as thinking about your font files, because fonts such as Roboto or Open Sans, they are already loaded in most caches. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because a large percentage of the websites are using those fonts. If you have a super specific font and you don't know that it's actually bringing you value, then it might be worse to consider using a font that is already being cached, so it's just appearing immediately because it's already there. I know I'm a designer myself, so there's a lot of discussions around the fonts, but I think everything you do, look at it also from a performance angle. Does it affect performance negatively? And if so, is it worth it? If it's worth it, okay. If it's not, then probably you shouldn't do it.
So it's like anything, make a list and go through the most crucial elements, make sure they're ticked off, because those are the ones that will make the difference.
Yep.
So is there anything else we've missed off today before I go into some quick fire questions?
Yeah, I mean, I can say that I think page speed is only one element of website optimization, right? If we compare it back to the store, it's like if it's your door opener, then there's a lot of stuff happening once you're in the store, right? If you're walking through the aisles with the different racks, as you do on the website, that's your A/B testing, usually your conversion rate optimization. And what we found is, and that's what I'm working on at the moment with pathmonk.com, is there's one element missing, which is how do you proactively assist somebody, right? In a store, you usually, especially on high-end products, you have somebody that is kind of observing you, that is, trying to see how could I help you best, and then coming proactively towards you and bringing you helpful information. And that's just missing in the online world. You could be arguing, okay, there's chatbots, but a chatbot is passively, in most cases, sitting on the right bottom of the site and waiting for you to start interacting. That would be like a salesperson that is waiting in the store until you come to talk with them. So yeah, we're working on a solution to increase qualified leads automatically through the website by around 40% by being proactive on the website. So that's what we do with PathMonk. If there's anything I could share with you guys on that, if there's any questions you have, I'm happy to dive into it. But on a high level, that's what we do to sort of proactively assist on the website based on users' actual behavior, based on how long they have been on the page, based on which subpages they visited, and then serve the right information that is helping conversions to that users at the right time.
And one thing that you pointed out there that kind of clicked with me was your own users and how they are interacting with the site. Like you said previously, it's so important because every site is different and every site's got different users, and understanding their journey, if you like, just on that site will have a huge impact too in terms of what you need to do in page speed.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's page speed, but it's also what they do then on the page. In PathMonk, we are working with this in a way that we are automatically tracking each step that anybody's doing. So no Google events, Google Analytics events have to be set up. We're tracking each step that anybody's doing, and by that determining which intention they have right now, right? Did they just, come several times? Is it the first time that they're coming? Did they just check out a particular feature, or did they just stay on the homepage all the time? And did they just scroll up and down because they're searching, or did they just like stay on text because they're reading? So we're understanding all of this, and then basically an artificial intelligence figures out, because it's much better than a human deciding, figuring out what card to show them. It's smart cards that we're serving with content such as social proof, a testimonial, frequently asked questions, and we serve that information into their journey based on their actual actions to then increase conversions.
Excellent. That's fantastic stuff. Are you ready for some quick fire questions?
Yes, sure.
Excellent. So can you give me your number one go-to resource for information?
Okay, that's a very, very interesting one. I like podcasts a lot, hence I'm being on a podcast here, because the reason being is you get much more in-depth information. I refrain from rather, reading blogs, because you usually get only half the picture. So podcasts like yours, there's tons of them. I like the one from Nathan Latka, who is just really, quizzing business owners on the metrics. So I think podcasts such as the one I mentioned, such as the one we're on today, I think for me is the go-to source.
Excellent. What was the last thing you Googled?
What is the last thing I Googled? I didn't prepare for this question, so
That's okay.
I Googled this in the morning, actually. Probably, actually, it was something more personal because I'm planning a small trip here, so it's wasn't anything technical.
Okay. What would be your one tip for people who are looking to study SEO?
Study SEO.
Sorry, page speed, should I say, more importantly?
Yeah, I would say go to webpagetest.org, take the website that you care about, put that into the tool, run it, and get a feel for what is actually happening. Because I think it's a bit tricky to, look at all the theory and all the tricks and match them, what could be relevant to your side. But if you work from your side outward, then I think you will be having much quicker progress because you're going to be seeing on the screen, wow, we're blank for 6 seconds. There's a huge JavaScript file. There must be something we can do. So that's, I think I would recommend to work outward from your page rather than taking like big concepts and trying to match them on your page.
Okay, and final question. If people want to find out more about you and what you do, where should they go?
I'd say the best place is pathmonk.com, PATHMONK, pathmonk.com. And if any of the guys are interested into either, checking their web page speed, we can cover that in a call as well. Or are interested in seeing what PathMonk is doing in real time, there is a button to book a demo, and then in many of the cases I will be in the call, in some of the other cases somebody else, but it's the best way.
Fantastic. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Lukas, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. That was great.